At this point, you may be wondering, when should you use one type of loop instead of another type of loop? What's the most appropriate time to use a while loop or a for loop or a for-in loop? In a lot of cases, it's really at your own discretion to decide which type of loop you want to use based on your design decisions. But there are some guiding principles and best practices for using loops that we'll talk about in this section. And we'll begin with a while loop. The best type of use case for a while loop to be applied is when we don't know how many times we're going to loop through our code block. Here's a scenario where that might be the case. In this scenario, we're prompting the user to enter some input, and we want them to enter the phrase hello. If they don't enter the phrase hello, we're going to loop through until they do, continuing to prompt them to enter an input. Of course, we don't know how many times it's going to take before they enter the appropriate phrase. So we simply want to loop while the phrase does not equal hello. Let's go to our browser to see how this looks. And we see that it prompts us to enter a phrase, and it's telling us to enter hello. If I don't enter hello and instead enter my name, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to prompt me again. Again, if I don't enter the phrase and enter my name, this time my last name, what's going to happen? It's going to prompt me again. But once I hit hello, once I enter the phrase that it's prompting me to enter and click OK, now it goes through and it stops prompting me. So it keeps looping through that prompt for me to enter a phrase while the phrase that I enter is not hello. And that's an example of when we want to use a while loop, because we don't know how many times it's going to take until the condition is no longer true. So the condition was true so long as I didn't enter hello, but then the condition became false as soon as I did. And in that case, it took me 3 times, but it could have just as easily taken once or 6 times. We don't know ahead of time. That's a perfect use case for a while loop. Okay, so what about a for loop? Well, we want to use a for loop when we do know how many times we're going to loop through our code block. That's not to say that we as the programmer know exactly how many times we're going to loop. It means that our program has the information it needs to know how many times it's going to loop ahead of time. The quintessential use case of this is an array. When we loop through an array using our for loop, the declaration of our for loop includes a condition that says that we're going to loop for as many times as our array is long. It doesn't matter how long our array is, we don't need to know that, but our computer does know how long it is, and therefore there's a predefined number of times that we're going to loop through this code block. In the scenario we have here, we have 4 elements to our array, so we know that we're going to loop through 4 times. Let's go to our browser and see what happens. We see that we looped through once to append the word hello, the first word, the first string contained in our array, to the inner HTML of our main div element. Then we loop through again to append the comma, then again to append the word world, and finally to append the exclamation point. So we looped through 4 times, and we knew ahead of time that we were going to loop through 4 times because we knew the length of our array was 4. Finally, we want to use the for-in loop to iterate through objects. Now, arrays are objects, but they're special types of objects where each key is a sequential number in the object itself. So it's easy to write a for loop where we just increment a counter by 1 to access the next field or the next property or the next method inside of an array. But for the general case of objects, we don't know what the keys are. So JavaScript is built in this for-in loop for us, pun intended there, to iterate through each of the keys of an object. To illustrate this, let's use the car theme that we had been doing in previous lessons. Here we've created a car object that contains 2 properties, a make and a model. Now, in this case, because we know exactly what the properties of our object are, we could just access them by name. But in the general case, we may not know what the properties or methods of a particular object are going to be. And that's where the for-in loop comes into play, because it addresses that general case where we can simply refer to each particular property or method of an object by the variable I, or whatever variable we decide to use to loop through those properties and methods. And we access those properties and methods the same way that we access the index of an array. We encapsulate it in brackets following the name of our object. Let's go to the browser to see how it looks. We appended the value of each property in our object to the inner HTML of our main div element followed by a break, and it appears that's exactly what's displayed on our web page.